This is We Admit by ASAP, the podcast where we share true stories from admission and enrollment professionals. I'm your host, Janice Crampton, Executive Director and CEO. My guest today is Pam Safford. I've known this woman for over 15 years, and we've laughed and cried and celebrated and supported each other. We've imagined and dreamed and boosted up and called each other back into focus when one of our egos or passion or sheer competitive nature got the best of us. Pam is presently the assistant head for admission and enrollment and the class of '81 at Ethel Walker School. Pam is the founding trustee and former president of the board for ASAP. She currently serves on the board of the Enrollment Management Association. So please join me today on We Admit and on our Ask ASAP podcast as we celebrate this profession, belonging, and collectively look to how, through the shared trials and triumphs, we can all realize that our actions, big and small, make a dent in the universe. Welcome home, Pam Safford.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
You have been a traveling dynamo.
Well, I'm back in the boarding school space, and that invites us, especially post-COVID, to get back out there, wave the flag, meet people, and tell our story.
I have to tell you that, again, because I've had the privilege of knowing you for the time that I have known you, meaning the past 15, and have seen your places and spaces of employment. There was a picture of you and Jeff Beaton and Jamila Everett and several others. Were you in Korea? Is that correct? Wait, where were you?
In South Korea, and then
South Korea.
I was in Hong Kong and ultimately in Singapore.
Okay, sure. By way of Cleveland, right? But anyway, there was this picture that I think Jeff posted that was of the two of you, and it was clearly at a panel discussion or something. But my whole point of mentioning this was I looked at it and got a big smile on my face because I'm like, Pam's home.
Oh.
Pam's happy. She's traveling. She's meeting people. She's making a dent in the universe.
Trying.
Really.
Well, and I'll say this, and I think it's germane to some of the things about which we'll have a conversation shortly.
Yeah.
That is that part of what makes these trips amazing is the irony and delight in meeting my colleagues, albeit not in Connecticut, where they're just 20 miles away, but instead in the business class lounge. I hope you're all flying business if you're traveling for your schools. On your way to wherever, or conducting a mock interview, as Jeff and I were doing in front of 100 people in Hong Kong. And it's seeing my peers that sustains me on those trips. And it's also during those times when we all get the benefit of perspective because we're not on our campuses. And so when we have a minute just to catch up, we learn from each other constantly.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, again, you captured what we seek to do through this year's podcast theme, and that is belonging. That so much of what we do feels transactional in the inquiry to app to visit to whatever, and yet the work we're doing is transformative, right? And yet you're seeking to convey to someone, in some instances through an interpreter, right? That idea, notion of join my community, be part of this, experience. But the community of practice that you and I have shared for many years is this world of admission and enrollment at these various independent schools. I've shared prior to the start of this time together today, your, let's call it on paper or LinkedIn, profile of where you've worked and where you've been. But can you walk us through a little bit of that professional journey as it then relates to what brought you to these places and what inspired you to, maybe embark upon some of those challenges? Because again, that idea notion of why admission, having come from Carleton by way of Ethel Walker, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, love that question. And I would start by saying that my first year at Shattuck St. Mary's, right out of Carleton College, where I was hired on the spot when John Heislip came up and met me in the student center at Carleton, I came later to understand how desperate he was, but at the in the moment, I was like, "Dude, I nailed it." Anyway, so off I went to Shattuck, and, as an anthro-sociology major with a South Asian studies focus, at Carleton, the true liberal arts experience, I was one of few who wasn't heading to graduate school. Carleton is known, for generating a very high percentage of kids who go on to get their advanced degrees. And I was not one of those people. I wanted to be a practitioner. While I loved that opportunity, what I most loved was being in communities and having the chance to form communities. And so returning to a boarding school environment, which for me, and we can talk about this later, was transformational, was very appealing. And so I was thinking either of becoming a dean of students or heading into the admission space. And I think I made the right choice. Uh, I have the best job in a school. And what I would say, and I can say more about this if you want, but in my first year at Shattuck, my director of admission had come out of retirement to take that director's job. And as a result, both because of her stage of career and her inclination, I was invited to be the traveler and further invited to pursue professional development in significant ways. She was not the least bit threatened by that curiosity and, in fact, insisted that I take advantage of PD. And so I've done that ever since and ultimately became the provider of that. But that was a gift to me.
I think as you mentioned the professional development, but also on the backs of age and stage and responsibility. Like, again, maybe it's because I'm the mother of a 30-year-old and a 27-year-old, and I'm still, paying their Verizon bill. The idea notion behind, here you go, here's a set of keys, and here's a credit card. And oh, by the way, there's no Waze or Google Map.
Oh, no.
It's the folder, right? It's the
Right.
folder that you open up from the notes from the person who went to the school visit before.
Yeah. If you're
And
lucky.
if you're lucky with the notes, and off you go. And I think the other part of many a boarding school um, faculty or staff members experience is, here's a set of keys, and oh, by the way, all of these keys are the various buildings and departments. They're master ones. I mean, there's just a lot of responsibility that we're saying, here you go.
It was amazing to just be given that freedom. And just as importantly, I signed up my first summer after work to be at Wellesley College, at which I think it was at the time a TABS or NAIS sponsored introduction to admission
That's
workshop.
right. Yep.
And then the next year, I was at Garrison Forest attending a Women in Leadership seminar hosted by 4 heads of school, including Aggie Underwood, Barbara Barnes, Barbara Warner, and others. I mean, these were legends. And so there I sat for 4 days as a woman aspiring to be a school leader in some capacity, and I was 23. And so, that was such a powerful experience that I think that came later to shape my own wish to provide similar opportunities in my alliance with places like ASAP. Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think again, as our listeners heard in my introduction of you, you present through a number of different state, regional, and national groups. And whereas you are one of the founders of ASAP and was a president of the board of ASAP, you also are now on the Enrollment Management Association board. And so the commitment that you have to professional development for people in this profession is notable. And I think again, it's part of who you are. And so on behalf of all of us, we
well, thank
appreciate
you. And,
we
look,
appreciate all you
I
do.
have loved that. I mean, whether it's with ASAP for sure, working, at the conference, or other ways, doing, also just doing presentations at TABS, and the subjects, the topics change, the opportunity to invite conversation because we're learning as much from the audience as we already are learning from each other on the panel, really invigorating. And if we're not learners, we shouldn't be in the educational space, and certainly admission people, um, are in that category as well, so Yeah.
What happened? What was the thing? I oftentimes use the phrase "the bell rang," and again, I use it in the instance as I describe my own journey and how I've moved from one thing to the next. But what prompted you to then move from Shattuck St. Mary, where you were an assistant or associate, to then find yourself as a director at Northfield Mount Hermon?
I would say this, you get out of college and you think you know everything. And actually, that is a fantastic time of life where, basically, I very
Yeah.
quickly at Shattuck said, well, I can be director here. And when they were looking for a director, I actually applied as an in-house candidate and did not come up a winner. And so there was that going on in my own professional aspiration. And also, I had met the guy it turns out I was going to marry. And at that time in the 80s, cohabitating was frowned upon in boarding schools. So part of our motivation in looking for our next job was to be at a place where we could be together. And it turns out we did get married along the way. But NMH came up, and I was ready to leave Shattuck. And all respect to Shattuck, it was a different school then and a wonderful place for me to learn, but it's a very different school now. Anyway, NMH came up as a possibility. And the truth is, I had applied also to other schools where I was offered director's position, and I turned it down. I did not want a director's position, it turns out.
Oh.
So at these interviews, it was very heady to have them say to a 25-year-old, "We'd love to have you lead the office." And I could name a few schools where I said, as it turns out, "No, thank you." But when I went to NMH, I was going to be part of a team of 18 people. At Shattuck, I was a part of a group of 3, and I knew I had a lot more to learn. So I was actually hired there as an assistant director of admission, and then I rose to the ranks of an associate director where I oversaw operations. And then I became director in my 4th year and was the director for my last 6 years. And that for me was very comforting to have the chance to spread my wings, just gain some competence and confidence. And actually, when they approached me to become the director, it was an interim situation, I thought, and I wanted that in my title. And I'll always thank my head of school, a woman who at the time said, "We'll worry about that later. You just take the director of admission title and let's run with it. And then we'll talk later about the interim piece." And she knew right then that I was her gal. And I had to gain that confidence, but I never looked back. It was fantastic.
You have mentioned a couple of times already, right? This notion of how women and peers, right? Those that may supervise you. So, from a hierarchical standpoint, they may be above you, but that collegiality and that peer, that community of women and how they have inspired you. But now, again, here you are in the position you're in at an all girls school, and that is such a case to be made for the kinds of things that happen in a community where you are single gendered. And again, I'm sort of making a statement as someone who never attended an all girls school, or for that matter, an all women's college, or for that matter. But you really have been fueled by women in leadership. And I'm just wondering, has that ever posed a challenge for you in a world that sometimes is very much dominated by men in leadership capacity?
Yeah, I would say this. Look, 35 years into this biz, I think men and women can be mentors to women. In fact, I did my graduate research on just that question of the paths to leadership that women tend to take and who fosters and cultivates those paths. And it's just as often men as supervisors as women who can, at their best, be those people. Two, I think women by nature are more communal and seek counsel or response to what they're thinking. And I'm being very general, but men tend to imagine they can do it and have the answers and are less communal. So they're not necessarily forming those groups, those sounding boards. And that as a practice, I think is very healthy for anybody. And so that's something that all girls environment naturally cultivates, because by definition, we are designed to maximize girls' opportunity. And part of that is we understand how girls learn, we understand where they are in their own development, both physically and emotionally, intellectually, and that differs from boys rather substantially, at those pre-adolescent and adolescent times of life. So, anyway, it's a thrill to be back in an environment that's thinking about those things all the time. And I was lucky to have, I wouldn't call a mentor. I don't think I ever really have had a mentor, but I've definitely had a couple of people who have swooped in and nudged me and challenged me to think beyond today and to remind me of what's out there and what my potential is, and I've been really grateful for that, and I try to do that with others in turn.
And I think back on again, I have the luxury of knowing you for this period of time and know when you stopped and started certain things, but I was always so impressed and, I think wishing that I had the oomph when you went back and got your master's degree at Penn, because that was very well into your professional
Yeah,
career, and that was a lot of commitment, right? Wasn't it like every week flying from the Boston area to Philadelphia to do that work?
yeah.
Wasn't it something like that,
It
right?
was a huge commitment from a number of people. It was definitely
Yeah.
a village enterprise. One, I was lucky enough to be at a school that allowed me to, effectively take a sabbatical. They also helped fund it a little bit, which was amazing. But I kept my job as director while also, flying down on Wednesdays to Philadelphia once a week. So I would drive to Logan, park, run to the plane, fly in, take the train to the, 30th Street station, and then walk to the Penn campus. And then I would do the reverse and be home by midnight. And, all but one time was I able to do that. There was only one night when I spent the night in the airport, which was a low moment, but, once isn't bad. But, I would say this, at the time, it felt like, if not now, when? In my 40s. I didn't have an advanced degree, and, I'd constantly had this voice in my head, "If you wanna become a head of school," and I wasn't at all sure that I wanted to, but lots of voices were suggesting I should think about it. I thought, "Well, there's no way I'm gonna be a serious candidate without an advanced degree," so I took the opportunity to do the Penn program, which was great. I was surrounded by a lot of public school and charter school people, which is very different than the Klingenstein or the Harvard program. But what I quite liked about that is that I was stretched to think about the world of education beyond the boundaries of independent school, which is a pretty precious space, and, learned a lot from my much younger colleagues, of whom most are teachers aspiring to step into administration. And I went in initially thinking, "Oh, I can help these people and tell them what they need to do." But then I realized, wait a minute, that's not the learning mode. The learning mode is to be vulnerable and to understand, if you're going to be a head of school, what how do teachers see the world, and how do you then inspire them to be their best selves if you're gonna be a school leader? So that was how I spent most of the year, and it was hard. It was a hard year. It was hard to be starting with taking the Princeton Review prep course to do my stupid
Oh,
CREs,
oh
and
my
all I managed
gosh.
to do was to become completely mediocre, and my verbal score went down and my math score went up, and they met in the below average middle. That was humiliating, but anyway, it turns out none of
But
that
it's
was
but it's not a trigger, it's not a
no,
trigger.
not a trigger at all. Anyway, so that was really, and I think it was worth doing, and maybe it yielded things different than what I expected it would, because it turns out I didn't pursue the head of school path very seriously. I applied for a couple of positions, was a finalist in a couple of cases, but did not come up the winner, and frankly, I felt relieved. I quite like the space in which I sit, it turns out. I love being a counsel to my head. I think sometimes I run the risk of being a threat to my head. I will acknowledge that. Maybe we'll talk about that at some point. But I like
Well, let's talk about that now because, interestingly enough, what I also picked up, was the use of the word, voices,
Mhm.
right? And I think so many times we have these voices, people saying, "You should do this, you should do this. What about this? How do you gotta do it this way, you gotta do it this way." And then as you're also describing being counsel for your head,
Yeah,
you're one of the voices in that person's head,
right.
right?
No doubt.
And, uh, and so how do you I guess the question that I ask of you to think about is how do you now deal with the voices? Or are you able to maybe say, you know what I mean? Like, do you still hear voices or are you able to sort of say, no,
You're making me sound a little crazy, Janice,
I
but
know I am making you
so
sound
look,
crazy because I
I would
thought to myself, no, in all seriousness, you know what I mean, right?
yeah, I would say this. I think that the point of real maturity in our profession is that we are in service to the school, and the head of school is the manifestation of the school in terms of the ultimate decision maker and so on. And on our best days, our job is to allow that person to flourish so that the school can most flourish. Now, that doesn't mean being a yes man per se, on the one hand, but it also doesn't mean being an antagonist on the other hand. And I think that finding the middle of 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 managing up on its best day is affirming the capabilities of your head of school while also cautioning or offering different perspective without being threatening. And that is a dance. And I think it's taken me a long time, and my if any of my former heads were to listen to this, there would be a couple in particular who would be like, "She finally understands." Um, Having said that, I would say I still run the risk of being coming on a little strong with my head of school, and I think it's from all the right places. It's passion, it's, you care for the institution, you want this person to be successful, you have the unique opportunity to see where she or he could improve from your humble perspective. Um, and I still have to remind myself to reel it back a little bit. Um, on the other hand, turning 60 allows me to be a little calmer and a little less, my sense of urgency is still with me, but I'm able to maybe take a breath and play the long game a little better. Not always, but on good days.
Well, I think the taking the breath on the long game, isn't it funny? I remember 30, 40, even 50, even 59. You hear people say, something happens when you turn 60. And as you've mentioned, you're 60th, I'm 60. And it's magical in some ways how you just kind of go, no, like,
Yeah,
it's okay. And
Well, and
it's not complacency. It's maybe more
no,
a
not in the
comfort
least.
in it's almost like comfort in authenticity.
Well, I'm just not as threatened anymore.
Yeah.
And back to women, and Lord knows men and women can be insecure, but I think women are wired to doubt, and so I think I've not entirely over that. There's always that sort of, that demon, but, at the same time, I think it's easier for me to be a little more pastoral, and not just to people who are reporting to me, but also to those next to me and even above me, and I'm happy to do it. And I wanna earn the trust of my head of school because that person deserves to have someone with whom she or he can say, "Whew, today was a hard day." Um, but that's hard.
And have you as a confidant because, right,
Yes. Mhm.
we oftentimes talk about loneliness, and this profession can be very isolating and lonely,
Certainly for the
but
head of school.
boy howdy, that head of school, right?
Yeah.
Ah, the winter months. They can be cold and harsh, but at ASAP, we seek to warm things up and keep you energized. And that's the reason why we're offering an enrollment marketing summit in February. Weekly programs and sessions where you and your colleagues in the marketing and communications department can partner together, look towards the future, think about strategies, both short term and long term. That's the Enrollment Marketing Summit, and we hope to join us. I also think too that oftentimes when I'm having conversations such as this with people like you, although there's no one like you, Pam, but you know, you're strong. You have been successful professionally and personally, and people look to you and say, "I want that," or "I want to be like that." And where I'm going with all of this praise and adulation is you've had some missteps. you've had some moments of oopsie. What is a misstep or an oopsie that you could maybe look upon and say, "I really learned a lot from that?"
Well, I think 2 things. That, in the category of over what did I have control, I've already alluded to this learning curve where I've come to understand the power and the threat of being, a number 2, and whereas I think for a long time I thought I was contributing by being, critical, I in a productive way, I might have been experienced as threatening, and I'm trying to reconcile that in my own professional practice. So that's one thing that not so much a skin knee, but now I have the benefit of perspective and reflection of.
Yes.
As to that over which I didn't have control, when I suddenly woke up one day and didn't have a job, when I had thought I was going to the office, like, "Whoops."
Oopsie.
Um, that was horrific, and, in my I think my takeaway but, unexpected gift, right? And that's a moment where, when you're in that sort of for me, much of how I define myself is through my professional practice, and so I wanna say this to anyone listening. It's great to be passionate about your job, and, well, you should be, and lucky are we who align with our job. If that is the only way or mostly the way that you define yourself, that comes with enormous risk. And I found out the hard way in that moment of going to the office in the morning and packing my bags at the end of the day. I felt completely abandoned by everything that defined me. And I was suddenly very alone, I thought, and my whole sense of self was what had disappeared, and I felt terrible. I learned quickly that I did have people who cared for me very much, and, in that moment, if you're lucky enough to have a partner, you find out if you're married to the right person. I definitely was. He was amazing. My friends, all the way from my boarding school friends, my family, came out of the woodwork. My professional colleagues, you included, were warriors on my behalf in checking to see if I was okay and in helping support me, and defend me. And that was the community that I had built and I was suddenly benefiting from in a profound way. And then my takeaway, and it sounds very sort of pessimistic, but there's a light side to it, was my takeaway phrase is, "You can love a school, but you can't expect it to love you back." And what I mean by that is, I will always want to love a school, and I go into every job still wanting to love a school and usually do. Um, and I can't expect that it's gonna owe me anything. Because the school's gonna outlast us all, we hope, and a school is this amorphous, complex creature that has its own crises, has its own sources of power, who's in power, who's exercising power, and, sometimes you're collateral damage, and, so one, it may not be you, and that's one thing I learned. It might be, but it may not be. And 2, the passion I bring to my job cannot be the only thing that defines me, or I'm gonna get into some trouble. And so, that's my story.
Well, and I think that the story that you shared, and I appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable and share it on the airwaves here, because again, I think through that vulnerability and authenticity, we can all be helped. Is to say the following: that I don't think that you are the anomaly in those who find their job to be so much of their identity. And I also think that the lesson learned here that we need to lather, rinse, repeat is the fact that the job, like it's this, as you just said, that commitment to an institution sometimes just outweighs when it also is time for you to leave.
Yeah,
It's
right.
time.
Well, and that's where
And
your fear, where your guides, mentors, close advisors are so helpful because you need someone in your life who's going to come tap you on the shoulder or kick you in the butt and say, "Hey, buddy, what are you doing with your talent, with your life, with what are you doing next?" And it's not to imply that you've wasted your time, but also that maybe you have more to give, and maybe there's a set of circumstances that would invite, you know, harmony in a new way, right? And that growth mindset that we ideally want to cultivate. So,
I was thinking in preparation for our time together today, I was thinking about you. And again, for those that are listening, you probably are thinking, did she just do this podcast so she could have a love fest with Pam? Well, the truth is probably yes. But anyway, no, there's a lot that Pam offers beside just again fueling and sustaining me on the regular. But I was thinking about a particular time when you were board president and you and I had a conversation where I was feeling, I think the term that is now used all the time is imposter syndrome, right? And I was feeling very insecure, very insecure. And there, again, we're at a startup organization back then. There are a lot of what's the phrase, barbarians at the gate, But again, that was then and this is now. But all that being said, and here's the moment. And again, you can probably pick up on the fact that I'm still questioning whether or not I'm going to bring it out in the open because I'm rambling on here. But wrap it up, sister. It's the following. I said something and I don't know what it was, but you said, "Are you calling the question?" And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You're sounding to me like you're not sure if you're the right one." And I was like, "Whoa, wait, like, let's backtrack, right?" And you leaned in and you're like, "No, seriously, Janice, we hired you. We believe in you. You're doing great stuff. Yeah, we have our moments, right? Don't we all? But you got to believe in yourself, right? You got to believe in yourself because people are looking to you and at you so that they feel a sense of security."
right. And they just less.
Right. And so thank you,
Well,
thank you because it was again that moment where you're like, "Oh," because I think we say stuff. "Oh, I'm such a loser. Oh, I did that." It's like, stop that language.
yeah.
Like, stop.
Well, yes, and I appreciate your reflecting on that, and I don't remember that particular moment, but I think we do, that's in our coaching capacities, and I think we all are coaches, to our colleagues. We sometimes we have to both acknowledge people's insecurity and understand, for women, for instance, part of what research would suggest, it's fairly obvious, is that for women to take risks, they have to know first that someone has their back because we are risk averse by nature. And so I have shifted my practice where when I'm asking a colleague to do something that might feel like a stretch or is new for him or her, in terms of an area of responsibility, I'll say, "I'd love for you to investigate this, do this, and just know I've got you. Like, if it doesn't work out, I have not set you up to fail.
Oh, good.
I am right
Oof.
here. I am right here." And saying that, whether to a male or a female, actually makes the world of difference. And then you've ignited them. And I think so that's one thing. And the other is sometimes to call the question and say, "Look, I have the evidence, and let me remind you that you are really good at what you do. Now you've got to bring it, right?" Um, and that's the kick in the butt.
Mhm, mhm. We oftentimes talk at our schools about mission and vision and values, right? We have institutional mission, vision, and values. You know, I I know personally who I am, what I'm about, what I seek to do is very different than, maybe some common threads, but very different than when I was 20. You've talked a little bit about those changes and alterations. You're 60. What are your mission, vision, and values, and how do they support you in not only saying yes, but also no?
Well, I will admit that get it? I will admit that
Oh, we should have a pause, but bum.
I will admit that I am still largely defined by my job. And so in my 60s, in this professional space, my mission interestingly, has shifted from, to some degree, from being a provider of professional development to admission colleagues to being a caretaker of families. I'm realizing that post COVID, and because I'm 60 and probably seem like someone's parent or grandparent, I'm seeing the pain and anxiety that parents as well as kids can bring to this process. Uh, Parents are scared, whether parents of privilege or parents who don't have much at all. People sitting on my couch are nervous about how to navigate this world for their kids. And I think we have the unique opportunity as admission people not just to talk about our schools and tell them what the next steps are for the application, but really be a counselor, in listening and then reflecting back where we see opportunity and talent, and even reassure them about, that they're not alone. And so that's what I'm most enjoying doing. So I guess my mission is to make sure to just care for everyone who's in front of me, uh, in on my best days. And then the other piece in my personal life, I have amassed an incredible collection of very important people in my life, and I feel honestly that I don't give them the time they deserve or I need. And so part of what I'm trying to do is to figure out how to reconnect and stay connected in meaningful ways, with the people who are important to me, starting with my own spouse and also with my family, and then my dear friends who really, for the most part, came from my professional life. Small collection with whom I went to boarding school or college, but it's mostly my professional colleagues who've become my closest friends. So that's a pretty simple mission, but actually sometimes work because admission work can be is draining, because if we're doing it well, we're giving a lot of our own emotional selves to people in order to invite them to give their themselves to us. And so at the end of the day, I'm pretty wiped. And mostly what I want to do is just curl up, maybe take a run, but then just kind of retreat. And but sometimes that means I disappear from the lives of other people who are important to me.
It's interesting when you talk about, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, but this job requires you to be on. You need to be open, you need to be available, accessible. And I think, again, it is not uncommon for people in this profession to have a similar how do we recharge by unplugging? And is it a team sport? Oftentimes it's a solitary sport. It's the running, it's the yoga, it's the swimming, now the big thing is pickleball. But my point is that,
Here,
again,
baby.
not here, baby, not in this house, baby. But it is interesting that there's this quiet recharge that we can do,
On the daily,
for
yes.
on the daily,
And at the same time, back to where we started, what I find most energizing is finding myself with colleagues from other schools, where we are either sharing funny stories from yesteryear and or, taking delight and laughing in whatever we're doing at the moment, new time zone, or standing on a stage at some godforsaken little school in the middle of nowhere, and, 50 of us have arrived for the 3 students who are coming to the fair. You just
yeah.
have to laugh, and you have to look around your colleagues, and also at even going to a school fair where there's not a lot of action, I just walk around and I'll, talk to people, and you've got a lot of young folks out there just starting out, and I don't know, in some ways, I wanna make sure they know it's gonna be okay and that someone's noticing them, but at the same time, um, I want them to understand how incredible an opportunity they have in stepping into the admission world, because I don't think there's a better job at a school.
No.
I really don't.
Here's a funny talk about full circle moment, and, those youngsters in the profession, right? And I say that's with love. I don't mean that in a way that should be perceived as me, patronizing. But Christopher Tompkins,
Yep,
his daughter, Hannah, works at Emma Willard.
stop it.
Stop.
Is she in the
And
admission office?
She's in the admission
No
office.
way.
So yeah, so here we go. And again, a shout out to Chris and a shout out to Hannah. Woohoo. But here you are, right? We know these babies.
I
And the next thing
know.
you know, she's on a Zoom training call and you're like, Hannah, buddy, and you
Well, it's
go full
exciting,
circle.
we want
It's
good people in the biz, and
That's
sometimes
right.
come from parents who were great in the biz, and, I've thoroughly enjoyed working with people who came from independent schools as much as I've enjoyed working with people who never went to an independent school, but come in with sort of shock and awe and appreciation for what these incredible communities can provide, and sometimes we take that for granted, but, you know, you can all of those folks can turn into wonderful admission professionals, and
Absolutely, absolutely. Hey, Pam, on this Friday
Yep.
afternoon that we are in fact gathered here today, and yet we know that our listeners will listen to it on a random Tuesday at 4 o'clock. What are some of your present challenges, victories, and gratitudes?
Yeah. Challenges, victories.
Hmm,
I mean, look, I've landed back at my alma mater, and I
yeah.
advocated for a long time. I didn't want to do that because I kind of wanted to keep my deep personal affection for walkers separate from my professional endeavor. And yet, as I was on the eve of turning 60, so to speak, when the opportunity arose, I sort of thought, wait a minute, why would you not go to the school you most love and offer your services, for better or worse? But like, if you can't do it, who can do it? And of course, the answer is any number of people, but why would you hold back from trying yourself? So that's been my current journey that's been amazing and challenging because less about, somehow protecting my experience here. I'm very clear that my experience at Walker's will always be my experience at Walker's, and it will never be threatened by what happens here. I sort of made that pact coming in, and it's clear to me that that will always be the case. I will not sour on this place, whatever happens for me professionally, he says. Um, and I've stepped into a job that is challenging. We're a girls' school, one of the few, one of the brave, who did not get subsumed into the coeducational environment, who, didn't accept boys, but has remained committed to serving girls or those who identify as girls. And, I'm really proud of that, and it's not easy living. Inevitably, our schools are relatively underendowed, sometimes under-enrolled. We have to make the case, ironically, for an all-girls experience. I think, it's interesting to travel and you'll have people say, "Why would I go to an all-girls school? Girls are mean to each other. Why would I wanna be in a place where they're snarky and gossipy?" And I said, "Hold on. The power of an all-girls school is that actually it's exactly the opposite if you're at the right girls' school. Once you walk in, and I would say particularly for boarding school because you have this, communal imperative here. But, you walk in and you remove, yes, the distraction of boys and in 2 ways. 1, boys at that age, and they should be, it's how they're wired, are impulsive, they are not afraid of saying the wrong thing, and they will take up that space. And kudos to them because as a result, they practice in ways that
Yeah.
girls do not, how to sort of offer ideas and morph ideas because they're saying it all the time. And so I think it's important for girls to have a space in which there's no one holding them back, which is usually them, either because they're ceding the floor to the loudmouths or because they're worried about making a mistake and how that's going to be seen by actually girls who are in competition with them for boys' attention. Get rid of all that, and it's so exciting to see what girls, and it's not like, as you say, patting them on the head and saying, "We'll
Right.
make this easy for you." Work here is hard. This is a stretch, but there's no excuse to hold back. So anyway, all that is to say
I think that's also muscle memory, if I might,
sure,
because
it's a practice,
you're doing it and and the next thing you know, you're in a co-ed world, right?
and then you're
And
back
you're like,
yeah,
you're doing it.
I
And
mean
people are going, whoa, where'd you learn that? And you're like, well, no, this is my DNA.
I left Walker's and imagined that there was nothing that I couldn't do if I put my mind to
Right.
it, and I don't mean like
There you go.
physics, but I mean
Right.
within what I felt
Let's
good at.
be clear.
I walked
Let's
into
be
every
clear.
school assuming that
Yeah.
I had as good an idea as anybody and that I had every right to seek the power as anybody else. Now, later on, you learn, but, that may not actually be true, that you're up against, archetypes and systems and assumptions, um, but I still today assume that I have every right to be in a room, and that's the power of an all-girls or for that matter, the equivalent would be an all-boys experience where they too have the chance to cherish that unique community that's wired just for them. So I would here's my pitch for the single sex
That's right.
opportunity.
That's right. And as it then goes back to you, that is the challenge and the victory.
Yeah.
That's the challenge and the victory that you have in your professional life, but your ability to make that case
Yeah.
is bringing it back to you. What is your gratitude?
Oh, goodness gracious. I'm never
I know, I'm asking it.
um,
Come on.
I
Come
think
on. You go to yoga. You gotta do a little in and amongst a downward
look,
dog. You
I
say,
think I am so lucky to have, um, the breadth and depth of people in my life who, care for me. It's unbelievable how lucky I am. I am privileged. I live in a privileged world where I live where I work. I'm surrounded by, adolescent girls who make me laugh. I, am part of a family that I'm so lucky to have the partner I have in my life, and then the friendships I have, are just these are amazing human beings from whom I have a lot to learn and who care for me, and I'm very, very lucky, very lucky.
and we do care for you, Pam Safford.
Thank
You are
you.
truly, truly, truly a gift to this profession.
I feel like
And
this has been very
the
personal, and I think I feel compelled to say that, I don't know what I feel compelled to say. Thank you for giving me a platform to reflect on me.
That's what we talk about. We admit that, in fact, the trials and the tribulations and the trials and the triumphs of those in this profession, right?
Yep.
And I think if we realize that we are charged with
Yep.
really hard work, and if
Full
we
zone.
come together as a community, right? We come together as a community and
Yep.
realize that if we learn from each other, we're going to be better. We're going to be better.
Totally.
So thank you.
Totally.
All right, one more question,
Yeah.
and it's an easy one because Beth puts together a playlist at the end
Oh
of our
god. Oh
year.
gosh.
You know I'm gonna ask you this.
Yep.
Come on. What's your Get Psyched song, Pam Safford? And you're looking at, where's that on the prompt list?
No, it might be a Miley Cyrus song. I'm not sure which one, but,
I came in like a
yeah,
wrecking
no,
ball.
more recent. So, thank you for
Okay.
that. Thank you for that uncanny rendition. Um, no, I do come in the morning sometimes and put my, little bow spear on and rock out, and,
There you go.
yeah, I think unfortunately, I'm way too pop 40.
Okay. Well, you know what? You know how to get a hold of me. You can circle back with the answer.
Yeah, I'll
But
give you
in the meantime, we'll say Miley Cyrus. Here you go. All right. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, friend.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of We Admit. To learn more about the Association of Independent School Admission Professionals and how you can take advantage of membership benefits, visit asap.org. That's AISAP.org.